The story begins with a young boy of 10, observing the world through the innocent yet protective eyes of an older brother. He didn't know then that the memories from this time would haunt him for years to come. His name was Michael, and he had a sister named Emily, who was 7 years old at the time. Emily was different from other children, meticulous, precise, and deeply sensitive to the world around her. But these traits, which might have seemed trivial to an outsider, were the seeds of something much more profound, something that would change their lives forever. From an early age, Emily had been labeled as the bad child of the family. It wasn't that she misbehaved in the traditional sense, no, her misbehavior was far more complex. Emily's sense of order was her sanctuary. She needed things to be just right, not because she wanted to be difficult, but because it was the only way she could feel safe and in control. Her room was her haven, a place where everything had a designated spot, where the world made sense to her. Michael, though only 10, understood this on some level. He didn't fully grasp why his sister was so particular, but he knew it was important to her. So, he made a mental note of how she liked her room, memorizing the placement of her toys, the alignment of her books, and the way her bed was made. To their parents, Emily's need for perfection was perplexing and, at times, frustrating. Their mother, in particular, struggled to understand why her daughter couldn't just go with the flow, like other children. She tried to reason with Emily, telling her that it was okay, if things weren't perfect, that the world wouldn't end if her room wasn't just so. But to Emily, it wasn't okay, it wasn't even an option. If something was out of place, it gnawed at her until she could fix it. And if she couldn't fix it, she felt as if the ground was crumbling beneath her feet. As the days turned into months, Emily's habits became more pronounced. Her need for order extended beyond her room and into other aspects of her life. When it came to food, for example, Emily had very specific requirements. If the toppings on her food weren't arranged in a certain way, she couldn't bring herself to eat. It wasn't just a matter of preference, it was as if something inside her physically prevented her from eating unless everything was in its proper place. Their mother, already exasperated by Emily's quirks, would sometimes lose her patience. "If she won't eat what we have, then she won't eat at all," she would say in frustration. Emily would lower her eyes, heartbroken but silent, unable to explain why she couldn't just eat like everyone else. Then came the day that Michael would never forget, the day that still haunted him, even now, decades later. It started off like any other day, with Emily retreating to the sanctuary of her room, ensuring that everything was as it should be. But that day, their mother decided to rearrange Emily's room. It wasn't done out of malice, on the contrary, their mother thought she was helping. Guests had commented on how unusual it was for a child's room to be so meticulously organized, and their mother thought that perhaps a little change would do Emily some good, help her relax and be more like other children. But when Emily walked into her room and saw that everything had been moved, her world collapsed. Panic seized her, and she immediately began trying to restore the order that had been disrupted. But her mother, unaware of the storm brewing inside Emily, stopped her. From the hallway, Michael watched as his sister's panic turned to desperation. He saw the fear in her eyes, a fear that he didn't fully understand, but that chilled him to the bone. Their mother, growing more frustrated with each passing moment, finally snapped. "Why can't you just be normal for once?" she shouted. It was as if the world had stopped. Emily stared at her mother, her face pale, her hands trembling. And then, for the first time in Michael's life, he saw his sister cry, really cry. It wasn't the kind of cry that came from a scraped knee or a lost toy. It was a cry that came from the deepest part of her soul, a cry that spoke of a pain too great for a child to bear. She didn't know why she couldn't be normal. All she knew was that she wasn't, and that it made her feel like she was a burden, a curse on her family. Without thinking, Michael stepped into the hallway, his protective instincts kicking in. Emily, seeing her brother, ran to him, burying her face in his chest as she sobbed uncontrollably. Michael held her close, his own heart breaking as he listened to her cry. He looked up at their mother, who stood frozen in the doorway, shock and regret etched on her face. In that moment, Michael felt a surge of anger that his mother had caused his sister so much pain. But more than that, he felt an overwhelming sadness, a sadness that he would carry with him for years to come. He gently led Emily to his room, where they sat together on the bed, her small frame shaking with sobs. "I'm a curse," she whispered through her tears. "I don't deserve to live with you." Michael's heart shattered at her words. He couldn't understand how a child, his sister, could feel so much despair, could believe that she was a burden to her family. He held her tighter, whispering that she was wrong, that she was loved, that he couldn't bear the thought of losing her. For the next few weeks, Emily rarely left her room. Michael brought her food, carefully arranging it the way she liked, knowing that she couldn't face their mother. He tried to be there for her as much as he could, but he knew that something had changed, something had broken inside her. And then, one day, they discovered that Emily had been hurting herself. Michael found out when he saw the marks on her arms, and it was like a punch to the gut. He confronted her, tears streaming down his face as he asked her why she had done it. But Emily couldn't give him an answer. She simply looked at him with those same haunted eyes, and Michael knew that they needed help that he couldn't provide on his own. Their parents made the difficult decision to send Emily to therapy and eventually to a mental institution. When Michael heard the news, it felt like his world had been turned upside down. He couldn't imagine life without his sister, couldn't bear the thought of her being away from home, away from him. He wanted nothing more than to hold her, to tell her that none of this was her fault, that he would always be there for her. But he had to let her go, hoping that she would get the help she so desperately needed. The institution where Emily was sent was a relatively nice one, and for that, Michael was grateful. Emily called him every day, her voice a lifeline that kept him going. She would tell him about the strange things that happened there, about the staff who were kind enough, and Michael would tell her about home, always asking when she could come back. Those 2 months felt like an eternity, but Michael didn't care how long it took, as long as his sister got better, as long as she came back to him. When Emily finally returned home, Michael was there to greet her, wrapping her in a hug that conveyed all the love and relief he felt. He made her promise that she would never hurt herself again, telling her that he couldn't handle losing her. Emily promised, and Michael believed her. But deep down, the fear remained, the fear that one day, she might relapse, that she might have to leave again, and that this time, he might never see her again. Years passed, and Emily's mental health improved. She grew into a strong, resilient young woman, and Michael watched with pride as she made a life for herself. She went to college, staying with Michael in his apartment, and for a while, things seemed to be going well. But that fear, that nagging fear, never left him. He never told Emily how much he worried about her, how much he feared that one day, everything might fall apart again. He wanted her to focus on her future, not on his worries. Even now, as a grown man, Michael still thinks about that day, about the look in his sister's eyes, about the pain she felt, about how close he came to losing her. It's a memory that haunts him, a reminder of how fragile life can be, and how important it is to be there for the ones we love. He knows that the past is behind them, but the scars remain, and he carries them with him, a silent testament to the bond between a brother and his sister, and the lengths he would go to protect her.